Welcome to another miraculous edition of the Corey Margera Show. I'm your host, your Lord and Savior of eternal coolness. You're a motherfucking taste god, Corey Marfucking-Jera. And in this episode, I'm going to be doing a retrospective of the PS2 and my history with it, my analysis and my thoughts on it, and what I think about the console, and what I thought about the console when it first came out, when it first launched. Now, initially, this is a really interesting story here because for those of you who know me personally, who know me on YouTube, who are subscribed to this channel, you know that I can't stand the PS1. I don't hate the PS1, but I personally think it's an overrated piece of crap. I can't stand how overrated that system gets by a lot of retro gamers and JRPG fangirls in general. To me, I personally think the PS1 is a piece of shit with ugly, pixelated, 32-bit graphics that look hideous in this day and age. That, in my opinion, they actually looked pretty bad back then compared to the N64 and the PC and the Dreamcast. So, I personally, I thought the PS1 was always an overrated piece of shit. I didn't like the games for it. I thought the games for it were really fucking stupid. I never thought Tekken was that great. I always thought it was an overrated fighting game compared to the likes of Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter and, Guilty Gear and even Namco's own Soul Calibur, Soul Blade games. I just thought Tekken was highly overrated. I did think Tekken 3 was a pretty good game, but it's still overrated, I even preferred Dead or Alive and Virtua Fighter over Tekken. So that wasn't a big thing to me. The JRPGs never cared about, I told you, unless it was old school Red and Blue Pokemon or Kingdom Hearts. I never gave a shit about JRPGs. So yeah, Final Fantasy out of the question. Played it, didn't like it, hated the turn-based gameplay. Didn't care for the story, thought it was very emo, it was very cheesy and stuff. Thought it was overrated as fuck. To this day, I still think Final Fantasy VII and The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger are the most overrated forms of entertainment and art of all time. And Grand Theft Auto, but Grand Theft Auto I don't consider art, so I'm not even going to put that into the equation. Whereas Final Fantasy and The Dark Knight with Christian Bale, Heath Ledger, I did actually think that those were forms of art. They were movies, they were actual video games, but I just didn't like them. I thought they were very overrated. Also never hated Parappa the Rapper. I literally hated PlayStation just for that game. Parappa the Rapper, Bubsy 3D, so many shitty games on the PS1 I thought sucked. I thought Gran Turismo was boring. Hated the PS1. Thought it was complete shit. Thought it was terrible. Thought that Nintendo and Sega were way better. Hated the PS1. Thought it was garbage. I even wanted a PS1 when I was a kid too. And we ended up getting one. And I told you in my N64 perspective video that we kept it in the music room, the family room. But I would play it on occasion. I would just, aside from like Siphon Filter, Twisted Metal was okay, but it literally, I played way better multiplayer games. Resident Evil was cool, but aside from that, I just never gave a shit about the PlayStation, the original PlayStation. So when the PS2 was first announced, I kind of ignored it because I was more interested in the Dreamcast. I was more interested in, the new Nintendo system that would come out, which would eventually become the GameCube. And I was more interested in those systems. I didn't give a shit about the PS2 until I found out that it can play DVDs. And basically, long story short, my family got a DVD player that we put in the music room, the family room, and we used to actually watch a lot of DVDs on it. We saw The Matrix, we saw some what was that? One of the first DVDs I remember we rented was this movie with Tommy Lee Jones and Ashley Judd. What was the name of it? um Double Jeopardy, I think it was. That was it. Double Jeopardy. I remember we got that on DVD. It was Double Jeopardy. That's what it was. And I was just amazed by the picture quality of it, cuz VHS, as much as I love VHS, it's very, I grew up with it, but this was just superior. This was just superior. The sound, the quality, the fact that you could just go right to the movie and not have to wait, like fast forward through like the trailers and the coming attractions and stuff like that. That was a really cool feature back then. And now DVDs have actually found a way to put like the coming attractions before the movie. But back then, the earlier DVDs did like they would just go straight to the menu. It would go straight to the movie, which was really cool. Like a lot of newer DVDs and stuff and Blu-rays that come out now, they put trailers in the front. So now we have to go back to that, fast forwarding through the trailers and the coming attractions if you don't want to be bothered with that shit. Or just go to the root menu or straight to the menu. Sometimes DVDs won't let you do that. You have to watch the coming of trailers, which sucks. That actually does suck about DVDs now, because they found a way to be fags and do that. But back when DVD first came out, you could just skip right through the shit and go to the main menu. And I thought it was really cool. I thought it was like a video game, because you could just like start movie, and it would be very similar to like starting a video game, select options and stuff like that. That was really cool. It was when DVD first came out, it was the shit. It was the fucking shit. And when I found out that the PS2 could play DVDs, I was like, you know what, that sounds cool. But, as far as it being a good games console, I thought it was complete shit at the time when it first came out, when it was first announced. I had no anticipation for it. I eventually became not a fan of Metal Gear Solid, but I did play the first one for the original PlayStation a few years after, my N64 Dreamcast days. I played it actually for the GameCube, Twin Snakes, which was a remake for the GameCube, and it was a really damn good game. But, I'm not a huge Metal Gear Solid fanatic fanboy, so I remember seeing the trailer for MGS2, which, it would become infamous. A lot of people either loved it or hated it. They hated Raiden, or Raiden. Why did I say Raiden? Raiden. They hated Raiden. I don't know. I just had Mortal Kombat in the brain. But yeah, they hated Raiden. They thought he was like a pansy. They thought he was this and that, and people either loved it or hated it. When I remember my friend first got a PS2, he got that game, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. I remember playing it for a little while, but I did not care that much. It did not make me want to get a PS2. That was one of the, that game actually came out a year after the launch of the PS2. But, almost everybody I knew who had a PS2 got that game. I only knew like one or two people who had Grand Theft Auto 3. Everyone I knew who got a PS2 wanted to play Metal Gear Solid 2. And to me, I was like, yeah, whatever. I don't care that much about it. It's, I was more interested in, like, again, the Dreamcast, which would become discontinued, unfortunately, which gave me another reason to hate the PS2 during its early days. I just did not like Sony in video games at the time. But, and in retrospective, I do think that the industry would have been better without Sony. But I don't hate Sony like I did back then. I do think Sony is a great electronics company. Not really crazy about them in the gaming market. But, when the PS2 first came out, I was like, dude, this thing, it's like a Dreamcast with a DVD player with a better controller. Which, in hindsight was good, because I loved the Dreamcast. I loved DVDs at the time. And I did think the PlayStation controller was better than the Dreamcast controller, because the Dreamcast controller it was a good controller. It wasn't a bad controller by any means. But I do prefer the PlayStation, did prefer like a smaller controller. I'm old school. I like the Genesis SNES controller, the 6-button Genesis controller, the PlayStation controller. I'm old school. I like smaller controllers. Not really crazy. I mean, I do like the N64 and the Dreamcast controller. But, I do prefer a smaller controller. That's just me personally. That's just my preference. But it was just I just didn't care. It was like the games look shit. They made a sequel to Parappa the Rapper. They had a bunch of they had like Metal Gear Solid and stuff like that. Final Fantasy X. But the launch itself was shitty. A lot of these games came out like a year later. I remember, because I was in junior high school when this came out, when this console came out, and people were overhyping it, and I really did not care. I was at the time I was waiting for a good wrestling game to come out, because this was when the PS2 came out. Wrestling was the shit. WWF was the shit. I wanted a good game that would be like in the league of WWF No Mercy for the N64, and SmackDown. Just Bring It came out, and I was just like, I was unimpressed. I liked the game, but it just was not. It's not something that you could go back and play. It's not. It didn't have that much good replay value. I mean, you had. It was like whatever, man. The PS2 to me was just overhyped when it first came out, and looking at it now, and looking at it now, it's actually my favorite video game console of all time. And it's a funny story, and I'll tell you why it became my favorite video game console of all time. When I went from hating the PS2 to loving the PS2, and the reason I started loving the PS2 was because basically I think it was 2001 or 2002. My friend came over, and he had a PS2. He brought it over because I was basically like, yeah, bring your games over and stuff. That would be cool. And I had no interest in the PS2, but he. Sorry about that, guys. I thought someone was at the door. But anyway, yeah, that's basically my friend. He came over. He brought his PS2 over, and he brought over some really cool games. I think it had to have been 2002. I think it was 2002. It was right before Christmas. It was like I remember it had to. Yeah, it was 2002. I'm sorry, because it was. I was a freshman in high school, and I was looking forward to some really cool GameCube games that were coming out. I had a Dreamcast and a GameCube. And, the Dreamcast by that point was just dead. There was no more games coming out for it. Still had my old N64 as well. Used to play that for like a good wrestling fix. Because when in 2002, GameCube didn't have any good wrestling games up until like the Day of Reckoning games came out. And, the only good wrestling game I had for it was WrestleMania X8. And I hated that game. That game sucked. I used to like try to enjoy that game literally because the graphics were great for the time. The roster was great for the time. It had the NWO, the Hardy Boys, Rob Van Dam, stuff like that. But the game itself was just so. It was like the SmackDown games, the earlier SmackDown games. And it was just like way too like cheesy. People like no sold moves in that game. It was just like, it had no good damage system or nothing. And, basically, I was just disappointed with that game. But I still love my GameCube because they had a shit ton of great games. Wave Race, Blue Storm, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, which I ended up getting again for the GameCube because of the multiplayer mode. The two-player battle was way better in the GameCube version than it was in the Dreamcast version. It had a bunch of really cool games. Resident Evil 1 Remake, I got that. I got, what other games did I have when I first got the GameCube? Super Smash Bros. Melee, can't forget that game. I'm sorry, I can't forget that game. That was just a great time. Super Smash Bros. Melee was the fucking shit. My friends, we would like continue to play like Sonic Adventure 2 Battle and Sonic Adventure 2 Battle and Super Smash Bros. Melee like endlessly on multiplayer mode. Like those were the days back when you used to have your friends come over before this fucking online gaming bullshit, Xbox Live, PSN, all this online only bullshit. Fuck this. Like bring back split screen options and stuff like that. So basically, yeah, I was enjoying the GameCube, still wishing that the Dreamcast was alive. Was not a fan of the PS2. Um, Kind of like the original Xbox, only for Halo. That's it. And I thought the console itself was really cool because it had 4 controller ports, DVD playback and stuff like that. And I would eventually get an Xbox, the original Xbox, in 2004 when Halo 2 came out. But prior to that, my friend, he brought over his PS2, because he was basically, because I wasn't really debating on telling him that the PS2 sucked and this and that. I was just like, whatever, to each his own. I'm just a fan of good games, but if he brings some shitty games to my house, I'm gonna like kick his ass. I'm gonna bash the hell out of him. But cause like he would always bring over good games and stuff like that. But when he got the PS2, I didn't think that he would have good games for it. I thought he was gonna bring over like Final Fantasy X, which he did, and I thought he was just gonna bring over like RPGs and boring stuff like that. But he ended up bringing some kick-ass games over that really got my attention for the PS2. One of them was Capcom versus SNK 2, and there was a time where I just kind of took a break from fighting games during the so-called 5th generation of gaming, during the PlayStation N64 era. I kind of came back to it a little bit with the Dreamcast, with Mortal Kombat Gold and the original Soul Calibur, but I kind of took a break from fighting games a little bit during that time. But basically, he brought over Capcom versus SNK 2, and I remember playing fighting games like the old Street Fighter games, the old King of Fighters games, and stuff like that in the arcades. I remember this local arcade we used to have. They used to actually have SNK, King of Fighters, Samurai Showdown, and stuff like that. They had some kick-ass games, and I was like, holy shit, man, those games were the shit. But they never came out for like the Genesis or the SNES or anything like that. So when he brought over Capcom versus SNK 2, we were like playing that game like for a good couple of hours. We were having like a tournament in that game. And basically, he brought that game over. He brought down SmackDown Shut Your Mouth, which I saw a commercial for watching. When I was watching SmackDown, I saw a commercial for SmackDown Shut Your Mouth back in the day with Brock Lesnar like kicking ass, and I thought, wow, hey, that's pretty fucking cool. That looks like a cool fucking game. And then he brought it over and we played it. And that was actually this game we were playing all night. This game was just too damn fucking addictive. This was better than any wrestling game ever released on the GameCube or the original Xbox. Definitely the original Xbox. And this game was just absolutely amazing. Anyone who's ever played SmackDown 4 Shut Your Mouth, SmackDown Shut Your Mouth for the PS2, damn well that game is fucking awesome. Like, you can draft people from Raw to SmackDown or SmackDown to Raw. You could like customize the draft. Back then, WWE had like an amazing roster. It was that game had so many backstage areas. It was still kind of arcadey. It still had a few problems, but it was the shit. And like, this game was like the first game where they actually sold moves. Where if you gave someone the stunner or the rock bottom, and I remember reading in Game Pro magazine, there was a rumor that Stone Cold wouldn't be in SmackDown Shut Your Mouth because he left the company that summer in 2002, and and I was kind of interested in the game a little bit, and even though I didn't own a PS2, I would always be interested in any wrestling game. So I would always look up info for wrestling games for Xbox or PS2. If one of those consoles ever came out with a good one, I would say, fuck, man, I would have to bow down to the big corporate companies and buy a PS2. And I did. But, that weekend, that wasn't the sole reason I got a PS2, though. SmackDown Shut Your Mouth. We were playing that. We were playing Capcom versus SNK 2. We were playing, we played a little bit of Final Fantasy X. We played, what other game were we playing? Time Splitters 2. Time Splitters 2 was the shit. Fuck. And at the time, I had no idea there was a GameCube version of Time Splitters 2. So I was really, really, really begged for PS2 for Christmas that year. I literally, we ended up playing. He had so many kick-ass games. He brought over Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. We were playing the game thinking, wow, this is fucking awesome. We were watching the DVD features, like how the history of Mortal Kombat from all the past games. We were watching that. We were just chilling, and we were watching that shit. And then what really hit, and Deadly Alliance wasn't that bad because I knew I could get it for the GameCube. I knew it was announced for the GameCube. But, we ended up just... we were playing the fuck out of the PS2. That thing was just... like, holy shit. I've never... the Dreamcast and the GameCube were awesome. But I've never been that addicted to a gaming console since the Nintendo 64. Since that console. Since Perfect Dark. Since WWF No Mercy. The original Super Smash Brothers. Diddy Kong Race. I had never been addicted to a gaming console since the N64 at that point. And, but, it was just because this was, at the time, this was just extraordinary stuff here. It was just fucking awesome. And we were just playing the fuck out of the PS2. And then he pulled out Devil May Cry. The original Devil May Cry. And I don't know, did he have the second one? I know he brought over the second one at one point later on. But I think he brought over Devil May Cry 1 first. And we were playing that. I just remember, I was just thinking, this game looks pretty cool. And, it came, like Capcom would do with their mature rated games at the time. They would be like, this game contains much level of gore and violence. And when I saw that intro, I was thinking this game is like Resident Evil. And then I thought, whoa, wait a minute. Like, the intro was kind of comical a little bit. Dante was kind of fucking around. And, I was kind of like looking at the intro where I was like, is this like a comedy version of Resident Evil? And then we ended up playing the game. And the intro, like, once we got into the game, I'll never forget it. This was just... To me, this was when a video game character replaced Sonic the Hedgehog for me as like the coolest video game character. To me, it was like a three-way tie between, as a kid, it was a three-way tie between Sonic the Hedgehog, Mega Man X, and Duke Nukem. Those are like my three favorite video game characters at that point. And once I played Devil May Cry 1 for the PS2, Dante was officially my favorite video game character, hands fucking down. And this is exactly why I am so pissed off with what Capcom did with the DMC reboot, because they fucked up Dante. I don't even care if the gameplay is decent. The gameplay in that game was decent. It was a pretty cool game. I do like the fact that there was more platforming in the DMC reboot than there was in the original Devil May Cry series. But other than that, it was a piece of shit. And Dante was the fucking coolest character ever. He was the coolest character in the history of gaming. Bar fucking none. He was the fucking best. He replaced Sonic the Hedgehog to me. He was like because at the time I was just like I was still playing video games. We would play like Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, Smash Brothers and stuff like that. Old school Dreamcast games, Marvel vs. Capcom. But at that point I was kind of losing interest in video gaming until he brought over his PS2 that weekend, because I was literally like, I don't like the way the industry's going. All this Grand Theft Auto and the PS2 versus Xbox. I wasn't a big fan of that. Still not a big fan of that. To me, Sony and Microsoft will never be better than Nintendo and Sega. But when I got the PS2, I just threw my hands up and said, I gotta get this fucking system. I have to have this system. It's mandatory. I will never forget the intro for Devil May Cry. Before I continue, it was just so badass. Dante was like, sorry, we close at 9. Again, no password. Can't seem to get any real business. And I'm like, the fuck? Like, you pick up your phone. Well, it was just like that. And it reminded me of something that would happen in like a good Kevin Smith movie or like Clerks or something like that. It was just like that just fuck it, I don't give a fuck attitude. And, Dante was just like the coolest character. And then all of a sudden, this chick just comes in through the window with a motorcycle, riding a motorcycle right through the window. And then he's just chilling there. He's like, whoa, slow down, babe. And then she's just walking around with her badass shades on, this hot blonde chick, just walking around like she doesn't give a fuck. It's like so funny and so cool at the same time. It's like, what the fuck? And then all of a sudden, she starts attacking Dante, and then he starts shooting the motorcycle back. It was so funny and cool at the same time. It was just so awesome. It was just so fucking awesome. I will never forget. I was like, holy shit, this character is cool. He's eating pizza. He's got like skulls fucking stabbed onto his wall and stuff like that. I'm just like, holy shit, what the fuck? And I just immediately, I was like, no homo, but I fell in love with the character. No homo. That was like the coolest character in video games. Better than Solid Snake, better than Master Chief, better than Kratos. Dante is the coolest. The original Dante is from the original Devil May Cry series, is the coolest video game character ever in the history of mankind. Better than Sonic, Mario, any character you can think of. Better than Cloud or Strife. I'm sorry, Cloud or Strife. Better than Cloud or Sephiroth. He's the coolest fucking character ever, period. And in all of gaming. He was the shit. He's the shit. And, I would only start to love Dante later in, like, Devil May Cry 3 and Devil May Cry 4. Devil May Cry 2 as well, because in that game, he was very quiet. He was much more introverted. He was much more, like, dark, like Batman, like, per se. And a lot of people give Devil May Cry 2 a lot of shit because he wasn't, like, cocky and arrogant like he was in the other games. But in this game, he was much more like Batman. He kind of, like, flipped the coin like he was Two-Face. He had this two-sided coin. He was like, looks like this is your lucky day. He was in all the original 4 games. Dante was a fucking badass. Period. Even Devil May Cry 2. And Devil May Cry 2 had the best devil trigger ever. But that's beside the point. There's just so, and this was just one of the reasons why I just had to succumb to Sony and, just bow down to the PS2 and praise it and say that it was the greatest video game console ever created, in my opinion. It just literally, because of all the great games it had for it, and a lot of them came out were not made by Sony. So, and it wasn't until, aside from like Siphon Filter and to a certain extent kind of Twisted Metal, I never really cared about any Sony video games until God of War. And I played God of War for the first time. I was like, holy shit, this is like, and I still do think he is kind of a ripoff. Kratos is kind of a ripoff from Quan Chi from Mortal Kombat, but at the same time, he is a fucking badass. And it's a badass series too. And he's nowhere near like Quan Chi in the games. Quan Chi was a pussy in Mortal Kombat. Kratos is by no means a fucking pussy. So yeah, there's just so many games I could talk about for the PS2, and so many great experiences. The PS2 literally got me through high school, because high school was just a rough time for me. I didn't like high school. There were a lot of cliques, a lot of dumb shit. And, it was just a bunch of shit, man. I hated the 2000s decade in general. And, just high school and people starting to act ghetto all of a sudden, people were acting ghetto before that, but now it was just like mainstream. Being ghetto was like cool. It was mainstream. All this bling bling and crunk and all this other bullshit, all these other dumb cliques in high school and stuff. It was just stupid as fuck. And the PS2 literally got me through my high school years. So, kudos to Sony for creating such a great console. And kudos to old school Capcom, old school THQ, old school Konami, old school, all these great developers, man. But another thing I wanted to touch on about Devil May Cry was it brought me back to the old school beat 'em up games like Turtles in Time, Final Fight, Streets of Rage 2, Double Dragon. You know, Devil May Cry was just like a throwback to that. It was like the 3D version of those types of games. And that's another reason why I loved the game. But Dante was just like the coolest character ever. I hate Capcom for changing that series. Fuck you, Capcom. Kudos to old school Fuck new Capcom. So I literally don't even know what else to say. The PS2 was just an extraordinary, the best console I've ever played. It's still to this day. With the PS3, I love my PS3. You know, I love my SNES. I love all my other consoles, my older consoles, my newer consoles. But the PS2, hands down, is still my favorite video game console of all fucking time. And I would take it any day over this PC Steam bullshit. I actually got to do, because I actually found that there was this really cool Double Dragon game for Steam. I recently found out about from one of my friends. And I might have to get Steam. I might have to find a way to get Steam, because I have to play this game. This game is fucking amazing. This Double Dragon game for Steam is amazing. But I'm not going to talk about that now, because I'm talking about the PS2. But yeah, the PS2 is just fucking off. It literally, it literally was just amazing. I still do think that even without Sony in the industry, the gaming industry still would have been great. But, because all those games and stuff, like Devil May Cry, the old school, like SmackDown Shut Your Mouth and Here Comes the Pain, which is my favorite wrestling game of all time. SmackDown Here Comes the Pain is my favorite wrestling game of all time. And it's only on the PS2. And it's just games like that. The Dragon Ball Z Budokai games and stuff like that. We finally had good Dragon Ball Z games. That was another game my friend brought over. He brought over Budokai. He would bring over Budokai 2 when he first got it, and we would just like play that game. Like we would just like have tournaments in that game. That it was like, when I think about high school and I think about, the bad times I had in high school, how much I didn't enjoy it. I would always just look forward to like the weekends and like Friday nights, and stuff like that. We would like just play PS2 all night. We would just play video games all fucking night, till like 1 o'clock in the morning and stuff like that. It would just be fucking awesome. It's times like that, where you just like, holy shit, like that. It's just not only were the memories great. I still play my PS2. He also brought over 007 Nightfire. I remember we were playing that. He was like talking so much shit in that game too, because he was a little bitch. My friend was being a bitch at the time. There's so many games I could talk about on the PS2. I literally don't have enough time. I know I'm going over the 30-minute mark. But this is just my perspective on the PS2. It just became a console. When it first came out, I hated it. I thought it was a piece of shit. Thought it was overrated. Had no good games. Thought it was just going to be like the PS2, but with better graphics. I mean, the PS1, but with better graphics. And then when I found out it had a DVD player and, it had so many great games like this, it just became my favorite console of all time. It was amazing how a console I at one point hated became my favorite gaming console of all time. It's amazing. Granted, there are some faults with the PS2. I would have preferred if it would have had 4 controller ports instead of 2, and us having to buy a fucking multi-tap, and stuff like that. I do wish it would have had a little bit better graphics, kind of like the GameCube and the original Xbox, because out of the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox, the PS2 had the weakest graphics. It was kind of like the Dreamcast graphics. So it wasn't like graphically wise, it wasn't the best, but it was, to me, it was just, I'll deal with it because I don't care. Um, the graphics are good enough. They're good graphics. Not like the PS1 where the graphics were ugly and just pixelated shit. The graphics on the PS2 actually did look good. They were like the Dreamcast. Some games actually did look better than what um, I thought the PS2 would be able to handle. I mean, I literally go back to playing games like God of War 2 and Resident Evil 4. I literally thought that this game would not look as good on the PS2. I was so wrong. When Resident Evil 4 was ported to the PS2, I was shocked. I was shocked that it looked just as good as the GameCube version, as well as you had extra features too because of the DVD technology. You could play as Ada Wong once you beat the game. You can unlock so many other things in the game. It was amazing. I still think the PS2 version of Resident Evil 4 was better than the GameCube version. I love the GameCube version, but the PS2 was just the shit. The shit. It was just it had every single genre I liked. It even had a good beat 'em up game in the form of Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, which was available for every system. But I really do wish beat 'em ups would make a comeback because I don't like the Wii, but I do think Mad World was amazing. I thought that Splatterhouse for the PS3 was amazing. I really hope that beat 'em ups and hack and slash games can become the new standard in gaming. I really want them to replace first person shooters as the most popular genre in gaming. But that's just my take on it. I'm gonna end this video now because it's going on too long. But I love the PS2. It's my favorite console of all time. I love it. Kudos to Sony, all those great third-party developers. Thank you for getting me through my high school years. I think if you're a gamer now and you've never played the PS2, I recommend that you check it out. It's an excellent system. There's so many great games for it. They're very affordable now. You could buy them anywhere, pretty much, like at used, like Play and Trade, eBay, Amazon, stuff like that. I definitely recommend getting the PS2, which most of you probably already did. But yeah, I think even if you did play it a little bit, you should go back and replay some really great classics. That's it, guys. I'm out. Later.